lot of information. Let me apologize for how slowly the doctor talks there, so I appreciate him trying to get everything in there. We do have a short amount of time, so on that note, I'm going to introduce a lady here who I believe everyone here is a rock star, but she certainly is a trailblazing rock star. So with no further ado, Dr. Sue Sisley is going to talk to us today about navigating inexplicable barriers to research.
I'm thrilled to be here, and especially after going after two excellent speakers, I'm hoping I can keep this momentum going. I'm just gonna try to fly through this because I know we have a ton of info, and I have a really special guest to introduce at the end. I'm actually really happy to be back in Florida. I was just here a week ago in Miami, presenting at the Cannabis and the NFL conference, and presenting our data on cannabis for chronic pain. And my hair seems to really enjoy this humidity. It keeps growing by the minute. It's really frustrating. So anyway, I want to talk to you guys. I know many of you in the room, and I really appreciate all your support following the saga on this study. This is probably the clinical trial we're best known for. It's gotten a lot of media coverage. It's an FDA-approved trial looking at 4 different varieties of whole plant flower in military veterans that have PTSD. And these are my collaborators. And for those of you who've been following the saga, I want to update you that the good news is after so many years of battling the government, not only did we get underway 2 years ago, and we've been actively enrolling veterans. We have 60 vets that have already completed the 3-month protocol. We only need 76 to be publishable, and so we've enrolled our 65th veteran last week. So we expect to be, we're on track to finish this on time by the end of this year with 0 cooperation from the VA hospital. So I'm really proud that we have persevered and gotten to the point where we will, and I really owe you guys for standing by us through this whole battle. But we will have, we will be unblinding all the data in probably early spring and working on publishing all of it. The good and the bad of cannabis will all be put into the public domain for everyone to scrutinize. But this is an FDA phase 2 trial, so it's a very important point I want to make here. Many of you saw President Trump sign the Right to Try bill last week, and many are questioning whether cannabis is protected under right to try on the federal level. And we would argue that this study is a perfect example of why cannabis qualifies, because we are putting flower through the FDA drug development process, and we're at phase 2 already. So I'm hoping that a patient here in Florida may be the first to challenge this in court and get a sympathetic judge to order the government to allow them to be on cannabis under right to try. So we'll see how that pans out. But I want to just jump in. For those of you I haven't met before, just quickly, I'm a primary care physician. I'm based in Arizona. I don't own anything in the cannabis space very deliberately. As a scientist, I want to stay away from owning any equity in dispensaries or grows, and I don't write recommendations because Arizona law doesn't allow that for me. But I do. The first bullet point was accurate for the first 46 years of my life, but last year I ended up getting diagnosed with breast cancer, and I chose to start using cannabis. I went through all the traditional, surgery, radiation, but I rejected chemo and instead went on a high, sort of a CBD-rich THC oil. I did this because there's real data. This is one of my colleagues who this is just a synthetic cannabinoid in a petri dish, and you can see these are breast tumor cells, and you can see what a dramatic reduction in the density of the breast tumor cells. And here's another example of his work looking at, these are mice models with cancer, and when they administer the synthetic cannabinoid, see less growth of the tumor, less incidence of metastasis. So I thought this was compelling, and the reason I bring this up now in every lecture I give, because I think it's crucial that we all talk openly about our use of cannabis, especially as professionals, physicians in the room. If you're using, I implore you to come out of the shadows and support the patients who've been so brave to come out and talk about this, and make sure it's the only way we're going to really destigmatize this and mainstream this discussion is by everybody talking openly. So thank you guys. Appreciate that. So I was a professor in good standing for many years at the U of A until I became the principal investigator on this cannabis trial that put me at odds with the university, did not value cannabis research, was terrified of it, and ultimately we were fired, but we got tons of free media coverage off of this, which was an incredible gift to the movement, because it really shined a spotlight on the relentless barriers to research that exist, and I would say the barriers to efficacy research. So I'm going to talk about that more, why safety studies are easily green-lighted in this country, but efficacy trials are the ones that are blocked. So ultimately, we ended up in our own private institute, Scottsdale Research Institute. We're happily independent from any university or hospital. We work through a private IRB system, and after being tossed out of the U of A, we ended up with this $2 million grant from the state of Colorado. And this is an important issue, is that there really is no federal government money to study efficacy of cannabis. So I was really proud of the state of Colorado for agreeing to invest in efficacy trials instead of promoting more safety studies. And so they put $10 million from the state of Colorado's medical cannabis program and plowed it into 8 different projects. So ours was the largest grant awarded, and but it's interesting that they refused to fund safety studies because they said the government is already putting in 99% of the funds into studying harmful side effects of cannabis and addiction potential of cannabis. So it was important to them to invest in trials like this, and they even let me do it in my home state. That's how important it was to them to see, they felt like the only victory for scientific freedom would be to force, keep it in the state where it was originally conceived, where they tried to run it out of town, and keep it there in their backyard where they're uncomfortable with it, and try to, force them to examine that. So this is after 7 years of struggle with the government. This is the golden ticket, right? This is the DEA Schedule 1 license. If you're a physician, you recognize this because you have Schedule 2 through 5. But Schedule 1 is that gives you the privilege of purchasing cannabis from our federal government. And as soon as I received this, I immediately moved to order 8 kilos of cannabis from NIDA, because that's what our study requires. And so I'd expect that would come by armored truck or something. And suddenly there's the FedEx guy, just like the illegal drug dealers use. So, like, I had no idea he was transporting cannabis. Why cameras are there, but we're required, we open up this cooler and then there's all these sandwich bags full of ground up cannabis, and there's like these little Ziploc bags, and you have to pour them out. You got to weigh all of them for the DEA drug accountability logs. So we pour them, and you see this green, it's like a talcum powder, very strange, doesn't really smell like cannabis. And really discouraging, after so many years to end up with this. And I think now I understood immediately why scientists have felt for so long that this was sabotaging the results of efficacy trials. And that's why it was important to me to show you guys this, because I want you to see what your taxpayer dollars are paying for. $68 million is going to NIDA every 5 years to perpetuate this monopoly, which I'm going to talk with you about more. This is actually the placebo. So the government does provide a placebo. This is the same cannabis, the same plant material as the other batches, but it's alcohol wash. They leach out all the cannabinoids and terpenes, which is inner plant material. But it's this is this is an important point, is that we were the first scientists to ever do secondary testing on NIDA cannabis. You can believe that you'd think that just pure intellectual curiosity would make a scientist want to send this out somewhere, but none of them, since 1968, have ever tested this. And I thought, are these guys just lazy? What's going on? And then I realized that it is really hard to do. You can't just send it to Steep Hill or any other lab. You've got to go to a DEA Schedule I lab. And they don't tell you who those are, it's a secret. So you have to go and cold call. So I've just spent 6 months cold calling labs all around the country till I finally found one that would accept this, and then there's a dozen forms you have to fill out in order to execute that chain of command. But ultimately, the results showed excessively high levels of mold and lead in all of the batches, which would have never passed any state-regulated markets that require testing. So I was really astonished, and when I went back to NIDA and FDA, and I said, what were your mold counts? Because remember, we're not allowed to have the drug master file on this study drug, so I don't know what any of their lab testing shows. And they said, oh, we've never tested for mold. We don't know what the count is, and I think all of us are just astonished that since 1968, they've never bothered to test for mold. So now I'm in a position as a physician, how do I knowingly hand out moldy weed to our revered veterans? It's just an awful situation. So our first step was, to go public with this because we felt it was urgent and important that the public is aware that this has been going on for so long, and we immediately, this thing went viral right away. All these headlines of, different swag, and it's, but ultimately we lost our partner at Johns Hopkins, which I think is another cautionary tale about how universities are still, completely spineless when it comes to doing this kind of work. But there are tons of universities that still run from this, and Hopkins gets $2 billion a year in federal dollars, so they're not enthusiastic about being aligned with a group that's actively criticizing the government. But we feel like we owe it to our community, to the patients, to expose this. So I'll tell you that we went on, let me see if I have that. So this is an important point now. The DEA 2 years ago announced that they would finally license other growers for research, and everybody was celebrating. But I want to point out, we were one of over 30 applicants that are sitting on the desk of the DEA now for 2 years, waiting for a response. This is the Form 225 that allows you, the opportunity to apply to be a federally legal grower for research. And the DEA has not made good on their pledge to the public. They've refused to took the $3,400 application fee, but did not process any of the applications, just as we expected. And DOJ is blaming DEA, and DEA is pointing fingers at Jeff Sessions. And in the meantime, scientists continue to be forced to use this really substandard plant material. So I want to jump to...
Excuse me. So you're using the material?
Yes, we're forced to use, that's the only federally legal drug supply.
You're not forced to use it.
Yeah, well, if you're doing a controlled trial...
But you're not forced to use it though.
I don't have to do the trial, you're right. But if you do a controlled trial in the US, which we're trying to help put whole plant through the entire FDA drug development process.
Let's let her finish.
Yeah.
There's questions I said, yeah, you're not more informed than anybody else.
So let me talk to you guys now about the NIDA monopoly more specifically, so you're aware of what this is. So NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, has a, let me see if I can here.
Is President NIDA or something?
Okay, so National Institute on Drug Abuse has a government enforced monopoly since 1968. They've licensed University of Mississippi as the only legal grower for these type of controlled trials. And this is Mahmoud El-Soli. Many of you have seen, he's been the head of this facility in Mississippi for many years. He's got his hand in a barrel of ground up cannabis. So that's what they do to the plant. That's what's so frustrating about the study drug is they basically, grind it up into powder. So they blend all these different strains in order to standardize it, and then roll it up into these cigarettes, which are then, scientists have dumped these out and shared pictures with each other, and you can see, stems, sticks, leaves, seeds, and what we'd like to use is the flowering part of the plant. And just think about how these clinical trials are done. We give patients cannabis by weight, right? So if this powder, which I can't tell what this is, the patients don't know what they're getting because it's a powder. So if half of the study drug weight is all this extraneous plant material, and what we really want to use is just the flower, you can see how this is effectively sabotaging research from the very beginning. Veterans say it's like trying to make a 3 Michelin star meal using Vienna sausages, it's a great analogy. So I want to point out that other countries do allow multiple growers for research. We're one of the few that creates this kind of monopoly. So all these other, Canada has issued over 20 licenses for growers providing study drug for research. Israel has 8 licenses, all allowed to provide cannabis for controlled trials. The FDA, we are not able to get any of the phenotypes that we request. So all you get is a high THC batch, a high CBD batch. We got a 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD. But if you dare ask for any unique cannabinoids, CBG, CBN, THCV, you're not going to be able to get that. And they claim that they can give you everything because that's how they've maintained this monopoly. But we've challenged this over and over, and they've never been able to produce the phenotypes that we've requested. And they've never provided a drug master file. So even though they're taking millions of dollars of taxpayer money, there's no transparency about what's in the study drug. So they refuse to provide this drug master file, which I would get if I was doing any other clinical trial. I would certainly get a DMF. And the point is that they've been arguing that it's international treaty that has enabled them to maintain this monopoly, but we've challenged this in court. Now we've taken the DEA to court about 8 years ago and won. We persuaded their own administrative law judge that this was a bogus argument about international treaty, but the DEA appealed and won, and so they continue their monopoly. And the good news is we were seeing, some cracks in the armor, where now even the head of NIDA was interviewed in a public hearing last year, where Nora Volkow admitted that her monopoly is a barrier to research, that this doesn't exist for any other drug in Schedule 1. So this is why my perspective is we, in MAPS, many of you have heard MAPS is the nonprofit that does all the psychedelic research. They're my study sponsor. So MAPS is actively, side by side, we've been doing MDMA clinical trials alongside cannabis clinical trials. With MDMA, we are at the end of phase 3 trials already with the FDA. But with cannabis, you can see we're just starting FDA phase 2. So it's pretty, I think, mystifying that that we've got MDMA, which most people would consider much more toxic, that's been allowed to advance so much more quickly. So just to point out, this is the Controlled Substances Act, the language. It says the DEA must provide an adequate and uninterrupted supply of cannabis for these trials through NIDA, and they certainly have not met that. It takes almost 2 years to get study drug from them. It's never what we asked for. So that's been really disheartening. So let me just point out that I think the biggest untold story here is the fact that even if, all of us want to see flower put through the FDA process, certainly as physicians, we generally don't embrace a drug as a medicine until it's put through the entire FDA process. What's interesting is NIDA cannabis is not allowed to be used for phase 3. So what the issue is now, there is no study drug for phase 3. We are ready now. We are finishing phase 2, and we will be ready to petition the FDA to move into phase 3, and we do not have a drug supply. So the only option I have is to go to China or Canada, where they already have GMP grade, and petition the government to allow them to import, but the government will not allow our own farmers to provide this kind of study drug. It's really shameful. And so I wanted you to be aware, the NIDA cannabis is only allowed to be used for academic research, phase 1 and phase 2. Sure, we wouldn't want to use it anyway for phase 3, but the point is, it is not even allowable. So this is a real issue, that whatever drug you use in phase 3 is the drug that you have to go to market with, and NIDA cannabis is not allowed to be used. So I think my point is that we all need to be worried about this, because this is the final barrier to research. This is the barrier to getting insurance companies to pay for cannabis for our sick patients, because they will never allow that until cannabis is put through the entire FDA process, and that's what we're trying to do. But this is a very crucial issue, is keeping the pressure on the DEA to finally issue those licenses for new growers. I don't care who it is. Of the 35 on the pile, I don't care who gets it. We need another drug supply, and we need to end this monopoly immediately. So now I'm at the end of my time, so I want to just take a moment to introduce my special guest. This is an example from the Boston CTE Center. If you guys haven't seen some of the images of these NFL players, the brain autopsies of these players who've had progression from concussions all the way to CTE. Here's a better depiction, horrific, a normal brain on the one side, and same age range of 5 NFL players scanned. You can see the incredible loss of brain tissue, the atrophy, loss of volume, and these are not elderly. You know, these guys are in their 50s and they already look like that. So I ended up, getting interested in this because I've had a number of professional athletes who've now approached me about helping them with the research side, and I started to learn about the NFL cannabis policy. It was really disheartened to see that they continue to ban, not just ban, but actively penalize players. And last year they sanctioned 25 players, and all of them were black, even though the usage rates of cannabis are equal between white and black players. So this is a real problem. There is a TUE process that is in place for all professional leagues, where you can apply to be on a banned substance. Major League Baseball and National Hockey League do not penalize players for using cannabis. And so I want to just show you, I'm going to just jump to, now I'm going to introduce you to my patient. Mike James is an active NFL player, and he was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers since that was his first team back in 2013. Mike and I, we're the first doctor-patient team to submit a TUE to the NFL, this was the response so far that the league commissioner has provided for why he won't add cannabis to the list of therapeutic options, because he doesn't believe the data is adequate. But so let me tell you a little bit about Mike. So over the past 6 years, Mike has enjoyed some incredible wins on the field, but also sustained some very serious injuries, including multiple concussions. He began receiving mega dosages of opioids, and let me see if I actually have his, there you go. Began receiving mega dosages of opioids from the NFL, which is the best strategy the NFL has, right, to get these guys back on the field. And but ultimately, this led to Mike getting a pretty serious opioid addiction, and he started searching for research online and found our institute and contacted me to find out more about our studies. We're doing studies on chronic pain, on cannabis as a substitution for opioids. So he became, when he became my patient, we found a path off opioids using cannabis, and now he's become a really articulate advocate for helping other, especially other professional athletes, to find legal access to lab-tested cannabis through the TUE process. So if you guys saw the CNN documentary, if any of you saw the Sanjay Gupta just issued Weed 4 last month, and let me see, at the end of, maybe I don't have that, at the end of Weed 4, you'll see that there's a mention that his TUE was denied, which was true at that moment, but I want you to know that he is continuing to have conversations with the NFL, and we may have found a very important loophole in the collective bargaining agreement that is forcing NFL to stay at the table and may allow Mike to actually take this to federal court. So we will see how we go. But formally and welcoming Mike.
I'll be quick. Mike James, active NFL player. Right now I'm pushing policy in the league, and I'm following Dr. Sue Sisley around the country to educate myself on this topic. Pulling a bunch of active players together. We're in talks with the PA to get some things in place where we continue to push this policy. NFL players are 4 times more likely than the general population to develop a dependency on opiates. So we feel like it's time for less harmful medicine for these guys to be able to play with. I'm forging a path, and I'm trying to be on the forefront to create some opportunities for guys in a position where they don't have an opportunity to speak up. So thank you all for being here. I'll continue to educate myself, and I thank you all for having me. Thank you.
Wow, I can tell you this, I've said from day one that if and when we ever get the NFL to change their policy, that it's game over. Because at that point, if the populace can realize that the best athletes in the world can continue to be the best athletes in the world and can recover from what we believe is entertainment, and it helps them, that has changed everything. And so I can't thank you all enough for continuing to pursue this. We have one more presentation, and I haven't checked with Gene, so he's probably going to get mad at me. I've asked him to see if he can limit it to 10 minutes, because I know we're going to try to go a little late. So anybody that wants to go to a break, you can go to a break. If you want to stay here and ask some questions as we go past 3 o'clock, hopefully my panelists will be able to stay with us. And so, oh, there's Gene now. I'm probably getting in trouble. I didn't say what I just said. So, yeah, the next presentation we have is from David Burke. He's the President and Chief Technology Officer for Strain Print Technologies. I've asked him to see if he could limit his presentation to 10 minutes, and let me apologize to him in advance. He kind of got the short end of the stick going last, so thank you very much for being here.
I'm going to take the time to preload and not take it off my 10 minutes, if that's okay.
Do you know where the presentation is?
Yeah. Oh, wait, there we go. No? Wrong one.
So last name's Burke. Look for last name Burke. All the way up top. Scroll up. Keep going.
All right. So as I was just introduced, my name's David Berg, and I'm a medical cannabis patient up in Canada. And I, along with a couple of my founders who are also here, have the opportunity to build a software company to help patients better understand how cannabis interacts with a variety of conditions. There's over 550 chemical entities in cannabis. More than 100 of them are bioactive. And the challenge is that there's a variety of unique problems that cannabis brings forth. It's not a molecular drug in a traditional sense. It's an organic plant that has the ability to morph over time, not just as people are crossbreeding it, but we see differences between different breeders. We see differences from batch to batch in terms of chemical composition of a given plant. It's whether you're taking measurements from above the air canopy or below the air canopy. We are, in Canada, have a medical program that supports over 300,000 patients nationwide. We still have a long way to go. There's about 80,000 physicians that are across Canada. Less than 10,000 are prescribing today. And the reason why there's a challenge prescribing is really around some of the things that you guys are struggling with or contemplating in this room as well. So to start off, cannabis affects everyone differently. We've heard about CB1, CB2 reception. We've heard about entourage effects between cannabinoids and terpenoids. Everyone metabolizes or titrates cannabis differently. It has to do with your hormone levels, your gender, your ethnicity, as well as the base condition set that you're treating. So one size most certainly does not fit all, okay? Doctors who are trying to prescribe, like the folks in this room, there's not a lot of clinical data that's available. Since the 70s with the restriction by the FDA, as we've just heard, it's incredibly difficult to study this plant properly. There's a lot of walls that are put up. In Canada, fortunately, with the federal program that's overseen by Health Canada, we have standardized production processes which are GMP capable, so it resembles any biotech that you would see. You have people in hazmat bunny suits tending to the cannabis plants. And then before anything is sold for commercial sale, we sell about 1,200 different cannabis variants legally across the country. Every single product is chemically analyzed, not just for cannabinoid and terpene and flavonoid content, but also for base heavy metals, as well as for pathogens and toxic, and I guess also for herbicides and pesticides. So with over 1,200 strains available for sale and over 100 large-scale licensed producers that are making billions of dollars in cannabis, it's very important not just for physicians, pharmacies, as well as growers to understand what's going on, but as well as for patients. Everyone needs to have a heartbeat on what is working and what is not. So what we did as a group of entrepreneurs, I've spent 20 years building software for a lot of US government and contractors, as well as around the world. We built a system to help gather that. And if you were around yesterday, our CEO, Andrew Murop, had the opportunity to talk about the patient experience. And what that is we've developed a mobile outcomes tracker that's fully integrated with the Canadian supply chain that allows patients to track over 350 different medical conditions, 50 associated symptoms, 12 ingestion methods, and we've got over 12,000 products that are being tested on the network at any given time. Patients, it's free for patients, it's free for doctors. You go on to the Android store or to the Apple store, and you can download the application. We get you up and running in about 3 minutes. It's a fully anonymous HIPAA, PIPEDA, and FIPA compliant longitudinal study. And what we do is we ask the patient for their age, their gender, their medical condition. We have AI that selects the most commonly associated symptoms, and then we hook them up into the supply chain. And then what the app does is it essentially helps them to track their ingestion, discover what is working for them, and also share their results directly with their physician in terms of here's a workable chart that tells you about the interactions I'm having with cannabis. which strains, what dosing that are leading to the highest efficacy levels. And what I can tell you throughout all of this as a medical patient in Canada, we're talking about here about having 1, 2, 3 strains. I can tell you that at home, I've got about 14 different strains, and I know how each one of them, how I should use each one of them based on the symptomatic flare that I'm experiencing. StrainPen is something that has helped me to discover this. The other thing we do to keep patients engaged and to continue to provide data into this global study is we reward them for their interactions. And the way we do this is we give them a point system, and as they accumulate points, they can use these points to redeem for things to help them medicate more mindfully, for things like vaporizers, grinders, boards, and where legal, we also provide discount off of medical grade cannabis with licensed producers under the preview of the Canadian government. After a year of having the solution out to market, I'm happy to say we've collected over 550,000 patient health records. Every time someone logs an interaction on our system, we capture over 56 data points. This has resulted in over 8 million data points in medical cannabis use, and I'm happy to say we are actually the largest medical cannabis study on the planet, and we're growing at a rate of 25% on a compound rate per month. And this is a tool that, by the way, is available for physicians right now. It's available for clinical researchers. It's available for government agencies and insurance companies, and we are up and selling this in Canada right now. What we are essentially doing is we're bringing together a big data set. You've heard about the evolution of big data and cloud computing. What this is really about is about making sense of a very large volume of data that's growing incredibly quickly from a variety of different data sources. In order to pull this data set together, it's not simply here give a patient some cannabis, monitor their ingestion. We also need to know the chemical composition data. Patients are influenced by reviews. We are also directly integrating all the seed to sale data. So what we're doing for the first time is we're able to give supply chain physicians and researchers the ability to track the cannabis plant from the time that the seed is planted, understand the full fertilization and feed regime all the way through, validate the chemical composition of that product through a COA, and then track the patient interaction or use experience, grouping them by cohorts. So all of this data is either gathered by working with data partners throughout the US and Canada, and all the patient user experience data is gathered directly through the StrainPen tool. This data feeds up together into our analytics platform and gives physicians, researchers, clinicians, and growers a proper decision support tool that is going to allow them to make recommendations to strains based on real cohort results. And when we're talking about interactions, we're not just talking about the specific strain. When we are analyzing the interactions, we're actually looking at the chemobar of that plant. So what that means is we are looking at the terpenes, the flavonoids, as well as the cannabinoids. So you've heard about CBG, CBD, CBN, THCA, beta-caryophyllene. We are tracking all of these chemical constituents as patients are using these products in real time. We are also tracking the changes in behavior and outcomes as patients use different batches of that same strain. So we're starting to see how indicators and terpenes are leading to that entourage outcome. So the results that we're starting to see in a very graphical way are what are truly the best strains for treating anxiety or Alzheimer's disease or depression. And what we do is we provide the research data set to the physicians and the clinicians so that they can do further drug development. But for the patients, we communicate to them in a way that is based on the names and the suppliers that they understand, so that when they want to go make a proper purchase, they have the ability to speak the right language. And we do this across 350 medical conditions. The other thing that we do is we study the variance between chemical composition of strains and outcomes on a geographic basis. So I can most certainly tell you that the Girl Scout cookie that you buy in a dispensary in Northern California is not the same Girl Scout cookie you're going to buy in Colorado or Washington State. It's very important to track genetic drift, because this is, if we're looking at this in terms of medicine, we want to reduce this down to a stable molecule so we can prescribe this much in the same way we would a traditional pharmaceutical or an aspirin. So finally, you know, what we're out here to do, and the reason why we're out here in Florida speaking with you folks, is we want to help doctors and patients and growers, as well as patients, to figure out how they should optimize treatment guidance so that patients can medicate mindfully and be functional and aware. You know, there's a term around that, you know, the idea of a functional stoner. If you speak to most medical patients, there are a very high degree there are high functioning users. I've been using quite regularly, actually, since I was about 13, and then as an adult. When I entered the medical program about 5 years ago, I use on a daily basis, and no one would know when they interact with me. We want to be able to maximize clinic efficiency. So if you're looking at providing the best level of care for your patients, but you also need to strike a balance between throughput, you want to make sure you're maximizing the number of patients you're seeing. We're going to shorten your time to prescribing based on our recommendations. And then the other thing we do with our solution is we actually conduct real-time research through activation codes. We've just completed our first academic research, which was published in the Journal of Journal of Affective Disorder. I've got a lot up in here today. And we are also actually just starting our most recent study on Crohn's and colitis and bowel inflammation, specifically using targeted CBD variants with THC activation. Finally, for producers, it's about optimizing the production so that they know they're growing the right medicine based on the needs of their consumers. So that's kind of me blowing through 2 years of work and research in 10 minutes. If there's any questions, I'll leave it up to the group.
Again, I want to thank all the speakers, and I know Gene hasn't given me permission to do this, but I think they've all agreed. I think we can go maybe 10, 15 minutes worth of questions, because I'm sure you all have a few. So, Dr. Gordon, I saw your hand first.
Thanks, Ron. Sue, how are you? Welcome back to Florida.
Thank you, sir.
For your study that you're doing, is that a smokable form of cannabis that the veterans are using?
Yeah, important point. Yeah, the federal government only gives you dry flower since 1968. That's the only option. So you can either provide vaporizing or smoked flower in these controlled trials. And that's a real issue here in Florida. I know the smoking lawsuit got, the judge ordered smoked flower to be allowed. I was supporting that lawsuit that John Morgan had spearheaded, because I felt so strongly that smoked flower is a very legitimate delivery method. It's taken me years to embrace this, but I understand this now. And I've been really impressed with the clinical results of smoking as a delivery method. And the fact is that there's the federal government has invested 30 years of taxpayer dollars to uncover the harmful effects of cannabis smoke, and they haven't really realized a shred of evidence. There's no association with malignancy or COPD, emphysema. So I think our own FDA has approved smoking as a delivery method for all of these clinical trials. So if it was harmful, the FDA, it would be unethical for them to allow it. So I hope that on the appeal that's, I guess, starting now, hopefully the judge will again order the government here to allow smoked flower.
In the back of the room?
Dr. Sicily, do you know, is this the same product that you're using for your study that was given to the IND patients all those years?
It's the same, right? It comes from the same farm at University of Mississippi, and it is is, yeah, the same depressing.
Today's the anniversary of Robert Randall's death.
See, yeah, I mean, I think that we all, Barry and I talk about this a lot, that why is it that these patients who come into our offices describe these phenomenal experiences with natural cannabis, and yet the controlled trials are not bearing that out. I mean, yeah, we're seeing some studies showing benefit, but not nearly at the level, the robust experience, the clinical experience patients are having day to day in the real world. And I think that that's just a, proof positive of how lousy the study drug is that we're forced to use.
Thanks. I'm Dr. Bob. I practice in Citrus County. Two unrelated questions. Number one is, with this appeal, how long can we expect smokable plant to be held up? And the second question is, how come we're not finding controlled trials coming out of Canada? I'm always looking, for the various things I treat for controlled trials, and of course in the U.S. it's like, well, no one knows, but I wonder why Canada doesn't have any data.
My crystal ball has a crack in it, so I can't quite tell you exactly the time frame. It's very complicated. I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on TV. It goes to the first DCA now. There's just several things that could happen. So I hate to say, because I might be wrong, I would think it'd be at least a year before, because no matter what happens at the first DCA, the loser is going to appeal, and it has to go to the Supreme Court. So I have a feeling it's only going to go to the Supreme. We won't know for sure until after the Supreme Court rules. On the home grow case, they made an argument to try to expedite it directly to the Supremes by bypassing the first DCA, and the Supremes respectfully declined. So I would imagine that that's going to be the same on the smoking lawsuit. So again, with all of that said, I would think at least a year, maybe a year and a half, but
there are published clinical trials. There are published clinical trials on this. There are several. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov.
It's funny, on the lawsuit, with all due respect, we're not really the lawyers didn't make an argument whether smoking is good or bad. The argument was, is it allowed or not allowed? And it really wasn't a determination over efficacy, it was a determination over constitutionality.
Yep.
And that's a different
That I
argument.
agree with you, but there are published trials. If you know where to look for them, they're there. You just need to know where to look.
You can look at Tikanolam. They're an Israeli company. They publish a lot of their results for smokable flower.
Yep.
And pretty globalized studies, thousands of patients. So that's maybe somewhere we can start looking.
Yeah.
I think right here, if you can just speak up without a mic.
I'm Susan McMillan. With part of continuing education, I'm offering the CEUs for mental health professionals and dietitians and nutritionists. And my question is for Dr. Hashem and Dr. Berg. Can you speak at all to tolerance and whether there's a difference in tolerance, if any, between CBD and THC?
Did everybody hear that question, a tolerance question, the difference between THC and CBD?
Well, you will develop some tolerance to THC over time, and you're going to have to potentially take breaks from your THC to let the receptors. It's not receptor reactivation or receptor growth like it is with narcotics, where you make more receptors and you need more keys for the keyholes. It's your receptors internalize, and you need them to externalize. So you need to maybe take intermittent breaks or intermittent holidays. As far as CBD, but I will say this: over time, you do see patients kind of diminish their dose. I think that that's related to resetting their own cannabinoid system. And once that gets reset, then they're functioning at a better level, because a lot of these disease states are related to cannabinoid deficiency. So, and as far as CBD, I haven't really noticed or can see any difference where patients are escalating doses or noticing a tolerance to it over time.
I guess we see a variety of